Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Guess what? It's time for another hometown episode. I call this episode UFOs in Your Hometown, episode 16. This again was born from a challenge. Name any town, city, or location on this planet, and I will find a UFO case there. I've gotten a list of over 1,000 locations provided by you guys, the viewers, so thank you so much. I've explored almost 200 of them, and yep, I have found UFO cases in every single one of these locations. So today I will be exploring 7 new locations, including Torrington, Connecticut, Anniston, Alabama, Scottville, Michigan, Quitman, Georgia, Abilene, Texas, Aloha, Oregon, and Reykjavik, Iceland. These include the entire range of UFO encounters. So we have sightings, landings, there are humanoid cases, cases involving missing time, onboard cases, and more. And of course, almost the entire range of evidence. So there are cases involving photographs, radar return cases, landing traces, physiological effects, animal reactions, electromagnetic disturbances, and more. So this is pretty exciting. Quite a few cases involving humanoids, actually. So you guys who love humanoids will definitely find some cases of interest in this episode. So let's get started. The first location I will be exploring today is Torrington, Connecticut. This was suggested by Bahamakin. Thank you so much, Bahamakin. This was a really interesting location to explore. I found like 7 cases, which are really, I think, quite significant. This is an old city. This was founded in 1735. It's mid-sized, about 35,000 people. It's a former mill town. An interesting fact about Torrington is this is where condensed milk was invented by Gale Borden. This was also a hub for the Underground Railroad. And no surprise, it has a very interesting history of UFO encounters. The first case I found in Torrington involves a 20-year-old man who, on the afternoon of June 11, 1972, was driving his brand new Plymouth Duster at the intersection of East Main and Torringford West Streets on his way to the bowling alley where he worked. He was facing west and was stopped at the stoplight when he noticed a disc-shaped object hovering just above the trees. It was a classic flying saucer, he said, shaped like an inverted dinner plate, flat on the bottom with a raised dome on top. It was 20 to 30 feet in diameter and had a metallic bronze color. He said it hovered motionless in perfect silence, and the first thought that came to his mind was, "I am really looking at a flying saucer." The object was no more than 100 feet away, and he was absolutely fascinated. So he put his car in neutral and exited his vehicle to get a closer look, at which point the object vanished. It either moved away very quickly, he's not sure, or just disappeared. But arriving at work, he told his coworkers, who just laughed at him. But to this day, every time he drives through this intersection, he still remembers the day he saw the flying saucer. Now let's move to the next case. January 9, 1984, at 9:30 p.m., this was at the start of the massive Hudson Valley UFO wave, Mr. and Mrs. Sprinters were driving on Route 4, 10 miles west of Torrington, when a multicolored, triangular-shaped object moved slowly across the sky, then dropped in altitude and began to pace their car. The bottom of the craft was crisscrossed with tubes and grill work. A red light at the center of the object detached, circled the craft 3 times, then returned back to its original position. After 10 minutes, the object made a sharp turn and disappeared to the south. In my humble opinion, this was probably one of ours, but you can make up your own mind about it. Next case, January 10, 1986, between 8 and 8:30 p.m. This is towards the tail end of the Hudson Valley wave. More than 200 people called the Torrington Police Department, reporting a strange object hovering over the Highland Lake area. In fact, people were reportedly pulling off along Route 8 to watch this object. One witness was Joanne Williams, And she said that this object, quote, looks like a cigar with square windows. Researcher Philip Imbrogno, who investigated some of these cases, says, quote, I received calls from very excited residents who said they saw things that were not of this world. I've heard this over and over again for the past 3 years. No one has ever identified it. It's a UFO. Now, rumors had been circulating that the sightings in this area were due to formations of ultralight aircraft, something both witnesses and researchers deny. As Joanne Williams says, this thing of it being aircraft flying in formation is a lot of crap. Philip Imbrogno writes, it would be almost impossible. Descriptions that we were getting said the planes would have to be flying 6 inches away from each other. Now, one witness was an anonymous Torrington police officer who described seeing a V-shaped craft. He thought it could be a plane at first, but as he says, it looked like it was standing still. Here's another case, September 28, 1989. UFOs were back over Torrington. Resident Kevin Shelton observed them from Route 8 and said that many cars had actually pulled off the road to watch it. One witness was Richard Weeman, who watched the object circle over his home on Clarence Street. And he said, quote, it looked like a diamond shape with 2 rows of lights. It looked pretty weird. Again, the Torrington police station received a flood of calls. And again, the explanation provided was that people were seeing a group of ultralight planes flying in formation. So that was pretty much the end of the Hudson Valley UFO wave, of which Torrington, Connecticut was apparently partly in. But there's more sightings there. One evening in September 2004, an amateur astronomer and quality assurance technician reports his sighting of 3 UFOs on 3 separate occasions. The first sighting occurred at 8:30 p.m. on September 7 when he was on the balcony of his second-story apartment and saw an orb-like object moving slowly across the sky, and it then quickly darted away. It was just 1 week later, on September 12, he saw another orb. This time it was looping back and forth before it zipped away. And finally, 1 week later, he saw it again. As he says, it was a very unusual zigzag type of pattern. It did the zigzag pattern about 4 times before flying off. So clearly not a satellite or a shooting star or a balloon or anything conventional. Here's another interesting encounter which occurred at 4:30 a.m. on November 17, 2007. The witness was at work when he looked out the window of a 7th floor building and he noticed a strange object off in the distance appearing to sway side to side. And as the witness says, I immediately called my coworkers to take a look and the security guard too. We couldn't tell the shape, but it was a bright light which actually dimmed and slowly went out a few times but came back on. Some said that they saw red and green lights at the base of the object and what looked like a laser-like beam coming from the object and shining down on the mountain. But this object remained in place for about 1.5 hours. Of course, they were at work, so everyone had to get back to work, so nobody saw it leave. But as the witness says, I've never seen anything like that before. And wow, do I now believe. One final case in Torrington took place on March 5, 2008, when a man was taking a walk and saw a UFO which he described as a semicircular pattern of orange and red lights hovering over the town. And as the witness says, the UFO passed over Route 8. Cars in both the north and southbound lanes began pulling over and stopping. The UFO displayed a semicircular pattern of very bright multicolored lights. 5 motorists started screaming. As the object became visible, a number of cars lost power and had to pull off the highway. I'm surprised this was not in today's newspaper. A cover-up, I suppose. Amazing. Thank you so much, Bahamakin, for suggesting that location. It's fun to always learn new facts, new information about these locations, and what an interesting UFO history that location has. Apparently part of the Hudson Valley UFO wave, but yeah, all kinds of encounters. And I've said it many times, pretty much every place on this planet has been visited by extraterrestrials, including this next location, Anniston, Alabama. This was suggested by Randy Hughes. Thank you, Randy. Anniston is a pretty interesting location. I definitely learned some things about it. In 1882, Anniston became the first city in Alabama to have electric lights. It's also one of few cities that was very carefully planned and did not grow naturally. Its population is about 21,000. It was the location of the company Monsanto, not my favorite corporation. They were responsible for major pollution spills there. And in fact, in 2002, the news program 60 Minutes called Anniston one of the most toxic cities in the United States. So that's really unfortunate. Another interesting fact about Anniston is it's very close to the massive Anniston Army Depot, a 25-acre large munitions storage site. This appears to be a factor in some of the cases here. In fact, of the 5 I found, 3 involve UFOs seen over this munitions site. So that's pretty interesting. I think you'll find this really compelling. An early Anniston, Alabama report comes from Special Agent CIC Lauren Vaughn. The witness reports that at 3:15 a.m. on December 6, 1958, while on duty as a civilian guard of the Anniston Ordnance Depot, he was sitting in his patrol car eating lunch when he saw an oval-shaped object about 6 to 8 feet in diameter and 4 feet tall, flying about 75 feet overhead at a very slow speed. He estimates 10 to 13 miles per hour. So he chased it in his car, following it for about a half mile, keeping his headlights off. He said the object had no markings, no protrusions, it made no noise. He said as it flew, it seemed to teeter from side to side. At one point he became frightened, backed into a driveway to turn around. Immediately, as if in response, the object stopped in midair, hovered over a warehouse for a few seconds, and then zipped off at jet speed. Now, in apparent confirmation of the ET's concern about weaponry there, another case of a UFO directly over the Anniston weapons storage occurred 1 month later on January 9, 1959. The witness, a guard supervisor, described seeing a reddish sphere in the sky. It was stationary at first, but it then began to move up and down and then in fast circles, changing in color from red to silver to amber. So after 7 minutes of watching this thing, it disappeared from view. Now the Air Force, of course, got wind of the sighting and at first tried to blame the sighting on a, quote, weather freak. But when the weather was reported to have been normal, USAF intelligence officer Captain Clyde W. Snodgrass wrote, "It is of note that this is the second UFO report out of Anniston Depot within a month. The power of suggestion here is apparent. The manner of movements of the object suggest that the occurrence could have been a, quote, mirror effect from some source of reflected light or a powerful light reflected from multi-layered clouds and giving both the effect of vertical and circular movements." So clearly he's skeptical, but that's the Air Force. They always have an explanation for these sightings. Another sighting occurred one evening in October 1975. The witness was driving north on Highway 21 and had just turned onto Highway 431 North and gone past the bridge when he saw a, quote, blue circle in the sky about the size of the moon. It looked to him like this object was hovering but moving slightly in all directions. So he pulled over, as did several other cars, and they watched this object for about 15 minutes before it disappeared. And as the witness writes, "I'm of Christian faith, and I don't believe in green Martians, but all I know is I seen an unidentified flying object. It could have been a pocket of space gas or something from the heavens, for all I know." But it does seem clear that most of the sightings in this area are because of the military presence. Another sighting from a military witness occurred in February of 1980. The witness was in basic training one evening and, quote, looked out the window and viewed 3 bright triangle-shaped objects that were brightly lighted. They moved in a parallel pattern backwards towards a water tower. I looked up and saw a large cigar-shaped craft between 500 and 800 feet straight up from my window. The horizontal section running the length of the object was dimly lit in a kind of orange, dull, white light. I called for the duty drill sergeant to come up to view it. He briefly looked out the window, then yelled to the few soldiers to go back to bed. We did, but when he left, I continued to view it, as the window was near my bunk. I watched it for about 10 minutes until it disappeared. Dramatic sighting occurred one evening in June 1990 to a 12-year-old boy and his cousin. They were standing in their driveway when they noticed that the leaves on the tree next to them were moving by themselves, even though there was no wind. They then heard a strange whooshing sound, and looking up, they saw a strange craft, which they said was shaped kind of like a, quote, elongated hexagon. It was hard to see because it was cloaked in darkness, but immediately the object emitted a beam of light, opening what looked to them like a square opening or portal in the sky. As the witness says, quote, I could see purple and pink glass clouds in the opening. It was like looking through a window into a different place. Now suddenly the whooshing sound increased, and the craft darted through this opening of light, moving so fast it left a streak of light. The entire sighting lasted, they estimate, about 6 minutes. They ran inside and told the boy's uncle, who did not believe them until he himself had a similar encounter. Says the witness, after years of contemplating the encounter, I know what I saw that night was real, and that the story needed to be shared with someone who would believe it really happened and take it seriously. Since that day, I have been a believer, and I teach my children that we are not alone in the universe. Thank you again, Randy, for suggesting Anniston, Alabama. Some amazing cases there. It's no surprise to me that UFOs are hovering over this munitions site. They seem to be very concerned about our warlike ways. This is one of the messages they give many contactees. Warnings about nuclear proliferation, war and aggression, greed and corruption, pollution, and the destruction of the environment. They're obviously quite concerned about how we treat our planet, ourselves, and each other. And that certainly seems to be what's going on in some of these cases in Anniston. So now let's move to the next location, which is Scottville, Michigan. This was suggested by John Court. Truly appreciate suggesting this location. Again, I learned some very interesting things. This is a pretty small town, only 1,300 people, so I was quite surprised to find as many cases as I did. I found 3 really solid cases, including one involving missing time. This is not a very well-known town. It's very famous for its natural settings. It also has a very famous music band, and of course a pretty interesting UFO history. The first case I could find in Scottville occurred one evening in October of 1978. After working at a farm all day, a gentleman was driving south on Scottville Road heading home when he noticed what he first thought was the moon, except it looked too big and too yellow. It was behind the trees, so he didn't think too much of it until he turned east towards his house. Now for some weird reason he passed his home and was turning north when he noticed off to the right a, quote, absolute white, brighter than daylight in the woods. So his first thought was that there were raccoon hunters, but it was strange because the light was weirdly confined to a 70-foot by 100-foot area. Outside of this, the woods remained completely dark. And as the witness says, I knew something wasn't normal. So he kept looking at it when suddenly this light rose upwards. He still couldn't see the source of the light, just this whole light rising upwards. He backed up his truck and rushed home. Getting out of his vehicle, he said he saw a blinking light heading towards him. And as the witness says, I was pretty frightened over this whole thing at this point. So this object now drew closer to him, and he could see the outline of what looked to him like a triangle shape with rounded edges. He said it had yellow, green, and red lights at the corners and a white light in the middle. And as the witness says, as soon as it passed in front of the cloud, I saw the shape. I knew it was not a plane. At that split second, it made a noise like whoomp and shot straight up and gone. Here's another case. Late one afternoon in June of 1994, 2 cousins decided to take a drive on the outskirts of Scottville to go deer watching. This was an activity they enjoyed every once in a while, but this time they saw something else. They had just turned onto East Sugar Grove Road east of US 31, and as the witness says, I noticed a black ball, about the size of a basketball, which seemed to be hanging in the sky. As we gained speed, the object stayed with us. As I watched, it began to change shape from a ball to a disc, as if it were rotating. It continued to pace us until we reached the stop sign at Custer Road. When we stopped, it resumed the ball shape and sped off to the north and was out of sight in just a second. It never made any sound. I didn't make any report at the time, as I didn't want anyone to think we were crazy. This next and final case in Scottville involves two witnesses, a husband and wife. They own 20 acres of farmland in Scottville, and it was at 2 a.m. on December 23, 2012. The couple was playing cards when they looked out the window and saw what they first thought was the lights of 7 snowmobilers off to the left. But then the lights rose up into the sky and began to approach the house. So the wife stayed looking out the living room window, but the husband got up and went to the kitchen window to get a better view. He noticed the time was exactly 2:03 a.m., and looking out the window, he now saw that his backyard was, quote, incredibly lit up, very brightly lit up. So it looked to him as if the object or objects were now directly above his house. And as the witness says, I had a very real fear. I moved away from the window due to being scared, and just like that, the light disappeared. So now he looked down at the clock and got an incredible shock. It now read 2:34. So it appeared that 31 minutes had elapsed in just a second. Now his wife confirmed this. Following the event, his wife refused to talk about it at all. In the months following this event, there were some other unusual things that happened. The witness discovered that crops were not growing in the area where these lights were first seen. He also learned that the electrical lines in that area, which ran underground, had been burned and had to be replaced the following spring. And as the witness says, I am still extremely nervous about it. What did we both witness? I seriously want to find a reason to prove that this did not happen. But it did. I swear, as God is my witness, that this is the absolute truth, which scares the hell out of me. Thank you, John. Scottville, Michigan definitely delivered in terms of interesting cases. That last one, especially involving missing time, was really interesting and compelling. Sounds like an important case. That guy was probably taken on board, though, again, I was unable to follow up on this case, so I don't know. But definitely interesting. Now let's move to the next location, which is Quitman, Georgia. This was suggested by 6 of 7, so thank you 6 of 7. This was a fun place to explore. A pretty small town, 4,000 people, known as the Camellia City for its profusion of camellia flowers. It's also pretty well known for a large number of historic homes in the area. It's a very beautiful place. It was named after General John A. Quitman, who was a hero of the Mexican-American War. I found a half-dozen cases here, a lot for such a small town, and some involving humanoids. So let's go. The earliest case I could find in Quitman occurred about 8:30 p.m. one night in June of 1962. Charles Howard was sitting on his front porch with his aunt and his son on North Court Street. This is just north of Highway 84, when he noticed an odd-looking light descending from above. And as Charles says, the object at first looked like a star in the southeast and almost straight overhead. I noticed it again in about a minute because it had become much larger. I called my aunt's and son's attention to it. They remained on the porch watching while I went out in the street. So he watched this object descend downwards until it was very close to him. As Charles says, I was no more than 100 feet from being directly under the UFO. My aunt was frightened by the reflection of different colored lights as they danced all over the area as the UFO ascended. The color of the object as it descended and remained motionless was bright white as something white hot. The object appeared, he said, to be about 100 feet in diameter. It had red, white, and green lights rotating around the perimeter. It took about 4 minutes to descend. It hovered for 1 minute and then took off at very high speed, disappearing in about 25 seconds. Here's another amazing case. 4:15 a.m., January 17, 1979. Ronnie Patrick was awakened in the bedroom of his home in Quitman by a beam of light coming through the window. So waking up, he reached out and touched this beam of light and could actually feel a tingling sensation like static electricity. He was of course dressed only in his boxer shorts, but the next thing he knew, it was suddenly 7 a.m. and he was now fully dressed and sitting in a chair. He was missing, he estimates, at least 2.5 hours of time. Following this event, he says he suffered from some weight loss, hair loss, burning eyes, diarrhea, and bleeding gums. He also has some memory loss and nightmares following this incident, and he believes that this event was related to another incident 2 years earlier in May of 1977, when he says he saw two very shadowy humanoid figures and a UFO. And he links all of this to another episode 13 days later on January 30th, 1979. He had just left Quitman and was heading towards Gilman. He had driven for about 6 minutes when suddenly he found himself 30 miles away, reaching Gilman. Looking at his arm, he saw a deep cut in his arm, but it was strange because this cut looked closed, as if it had been glued shut. Following the incident, his arm remained weak for some time, discolored, and he felt a burning sensation when this area was touched by water. So a very unusual case. And here's another one, an undeniably strange sighting, which occurred on November 1st, 1980, when several businessmen, night watchmen, and police officers noticed a strange object flying over Quitman. It was around 5 a.m. as Officers Steve Taylor and Robert Honeywell drove to the south end of town after hearing reports come into the police department. And as Officer Taylor says, "We were joking with the dispatcher about it when we looked up and saw an object with white and red lights flashing and blinking on and off directly south of us towards Madison, Florida, at a 10-degree angle above the horizon." So they were amazed to see this object start performing loops, circles, hovering, and darting across the sky. They radioed Sergeant L.T. Box to the scene. 3 other businessmen showed up too, so this group of men watched this strange object for quite some time. And as Officer Taylor said, quote, "It was definitely not a plane. I have a pilot's license, and I'm pretty familiar with planes. I don't know of a plane that could do all that. It made my night. I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and I wasn't a bit sleepy." So checks with authorities show that there were no weather balloons or other aircraft in that area, so what that was remains a mystery. The next strange case involves 3 witnesses, a 17-year-old young man and 2 12-year-old boys, friends of his little brother. They were at one of their homes in Quitman on the night of December 17, 2002. They were outside. They had hooked up a radio to the camper so they could listen to the radio and have lights on. The 17-year-old built a campfire. It was around 9:30 p.m. that the 17-year-old noticed a bright red glowing object coming down. Now, one of the 12-year-olds said something interesting. He said that they often saw these strange lights in the sky over their home. The other boy picked up a little spotlight and flashed this object 4 or 5 times. The object immediately stopped glowing and instead took on a kind of star-like appearance. So the boy flashed it again, and in response, the craft zoomed towards the boys at great speed. Alarmed and afraid, the 17-year-old called out to the boys, and the 3 of them hid behind a tree. And as the witness says, "As it came right over us, the dogs nearby stopped barking, and the radio station changed, along with the light blinking. What I heard on the radio scared me the most. It sounded like talking, but not like anything we know on our planet. This thing was right over us, and almost appeared to be confused, like it was looking for us." Now, per the witness, it moved around the tree, so they moved around the tree to stay out of its sight. And as the witness says, "I could see it very clearly. It was triangle-shaped with 3 lights on the edges of it. The object hovered over them," he says, "for about 15 minutes. The sounds on the radio then changed and sounded to him almost like an Air Force dispatch at high speed. The craft then tilted up and, per the witness, quote, 3 blue-like rings went over the surface and it shot out to space at very fast speed. As the witness says, call me crazy, but I get feelings about things. I got a spine-chilling one from that craft, as if it were coming to get us. A very odd case for sure. Here's another one. This one occurred on April 15, 2008, and does involve humanoids. The witness woke up that evening to see 2 beings standing by her bed. Now it was too dark to see them clearly, but she could see that they both had big heads. One was taller than the other. She said a weird pen-light-like device was floating in front of the shorter one, who appeared to be controlling it. And as the witness says, it seemed as if it was trying to get my attention. Something inside of me wasn't afraid, so I reached out to the light, and the taller one reached out of the dark to place its hand on my wrist. Its hands were human-like, but it was gray, and it answered my thoughts in my head telepathically. It was a man's voice. Then it released my hand. Both stayed there for a second, then were gone. I believe they are responsible for my strange gift of astral projection and other things since I was small. Who are they? I know for a fact that we are not alone. I have visited other planets not in our solar system. This final and very interesting case involves 3 witnesses. 2 of them own a 150-acre farm outside Quitman. Next to their farm is a very large array of solar panels, and on the night of August 5, 2022, they had just finished watching a movie, and around 1:45 a.m. decided to take a ride around their property. Suddenly, one of the witnesses, Craig, heard a voice telepathically in his head say, quote, "Look up, we are here." He immediately looked up and saw what looked to him like a triangular-shaped object with 3 lights on each apex. He was staring up at it silently, but did not point it out to his 2 companions. But then, one of them looked up, pointed, and said, "What is that?" Now, all 3 looked up and saw a craft that looked almost pyramidal, but it had 3 sides and a flat triangular bottom. Says one of the witnesses, quote, "At the bottom there were 3 big orbs or lights. The orbs were pulsating and changing shape in and out of being a circle. The craft seemed to rotate or spin in place. It seemed to stay completely stationary and hovered in place without moving for approximately 2 minutes directly above the solar panels. That's all we know, because at that point we were all so creeped out, we ran inside and locked the door." Thank you, 6 of 7. Definitely some interesting cases there in Quitman. I truly appreciate you suggesting this location. It's amazing to me that every location I keep looking at has UFO encounters. Let's move to the next location. The next location I am exploring today is Abilene, Texas. This was suggested by Fox Stewart, so thank you so much for suggesting this location. This is a pretty large city. I found quite a few cases here. Abilene was founded in 1881. It was a railhead for the Texas Cattle Drive and was named after Abilene, Kansas. It currently has a population of some 125,000 people, so it's a pretty big city. No surprise that there should be a number of UFO cases there. It's pretty well known for another reason. It has a very large number of statues from characters of classic children's literature, which has given the city the nickname, the official storybook capital of America. It's also the home of Dyess Air Force Base, and as we know, UFOs are certainly attracted to Air Force bases, so that could be a factor here. I found more than a dozen cases, lots of really interesting sightings, but also humanoids, missing time, and more. I think you'll find this pretty interesting, Fox. I certainly hope so. Well, let's see what we find in Abilene, Texas. The earliest case I could find in Abilene occurred one morning in 1951. It's an amazing case. An American Airlines DC-4 was flying from Los Angeles, California to Tulsa, Oklahoma. At 7:15 a.m., the plane was flying at 220 miles per hour at 4,500 feet of altitude just east of Abilene when suddenly a bright greenish object streaked past the plane at the same altitude. And per the crew, this object looked to them to be projectile-shaped and was almost the same size as their airliner. As it raced ahead of them, it left a white trail which the witnesses believed was exhaust vapor, but after passing the plane, the object seemed to explode, shooting red balls of fire in all directions. The first officer said it was like a 4th of July Roman candle. So what it was remains a mystery. Here's another case 1 year later, July 22nd, 1952, at 9:25 a.m., the R.J. Cooper family was at their home at 1217 Palm Street in Abilene when they saw a, quote, flying saucer. Mrs. Cooper and her 6-year-old daughter Kathy were in the front yard and saw it first and called out Mr. Cooper. And he told reporters from the Abilene, Texas Evening Reporter News, quote, I thought they were seeing things. I never had seen one of those flying saucers people reported. It was a round silver object. It was headed west, traveling not too fast. So he estimates that this object was about 50 feet in diameter. He said it went up and down twice and was in view for about 1 or 2 minutes before finally moving off to the west. As he says, it was definitely not an airplane. Now this was at the exact time that a flurry of sightings were seen over the Washington, D.C. area, known as the U.S. Capitol flyovers. 1 month later, still during this major wave, on August 17, 1952, Air Force Captain James H. Perry reported his sighting of a, quote, an unusual object. He was flying at 8,000 feet over Abilene. He estimates that this object that he saw was about at 15,000 feet of altitude and, quote, traveling at a terrific rate of speed, well over 500 miles per hour. As Captain Perry says, the object appeared oblong in shape. It covered approximately 30 miles in the 3 seconds observed. The object was just below the cloud base when first sighted and was climbing. It continued to climb through scuddy clouds and disappeared from sight. Now, per the captain, this object, whatever it was, had a highly polished metallic surface. The Air Force could not explain the sighting other than, quote, possible aircraft. UFOs were very active over Abilene in the 1950s. Another sighting occurred on November 3rd, 1957. A woman says that at around 2 to 4 a.m. she was woken up by a brilliant flashing light over her Abilene home. She said it, quote, looked like a great flashlight turned on in the city. It looked about the size of a washtub and seemed to be just above the trees. Now there was apparently another witness, Billy Marie Hill of the Bristow Trucking Company, who said that he saw 2 objects on that night flying at about 4,000 feet. The objects, he said, had red, yellow, and green lights. The objects moved at slow speed, nearly hovering at times. Finally, they separated. One went one direction and one went the other, and he followed one of them for about 65 minutes until dawn, when it left, quote, in a flash. Now, this was at a time that a series of sightings over Lubbock, Texas were earning national headlines and would go down as a classic case in UFO history. Shortly later, December 28, 1957, Highway Patrolman Marion Gotcher says that he saw a strange bright light darting around in the night sky towards the Winters area just south of Abilene. And as he says, quote, it wasn't a meteor. It was just as though you were looking at a brilliant locomotive light a long way down the track. So he estimates that this object was at an elevation of 3,500 feet. He insists that this was not an airplane. And in fact, he reported it to the military, and 2 officers from Dyess Air Force Base showed great interest, interviewed him, but offered no comment to reporters. The next interesting case I could find occurred in June of 1977 when 2 men became witnesses to a low-level UFO sighting at Fort Phantom Lake. The main witness was a student pilot and familiar with aircraft. He and his friends were sitting on lawn chairs overlooking the lake, watching the stars, and they were actually talking about UFOs when, to their amazement, an object appeared in the distance. It moved towards them over the lake and the dam that was located there. Then it hovered, reversed course, and went back the way it had come. Now the witness says the object was silent, not much larger than a small car, and hovered maybe 150 to 200 feet overhead. It seemed to glow red and looked almost translucent. 5 minutes later it reappeared, hovered, made a few right-angle turns, and then moved over to the power plant at the far end of the lake. It moved no faster than 20 miles per hour and remained in view for nearly 20 minutes. And as the witness says, I know I am not crazy. There was someone else with me who saw the same thing. I do not know what I saw. I only know what it was not. It did not look like anything I have seen in the air before or since. Now this is one of many cases I've outlined over dams, and in fact I did a whole episode about them on this channel, and I included this case, but I thought it was important to include it again because yeah, it occurred over Abilene. And here's another one. One summer evening in 1987, a couple was sitting in the back of their pickup truck on the outskirts of Abilene, just watching the stars and a meteor shower. Suddenly they noticed that the stars in the sky began to disappear from above them. And this was weird because there were no clouds in the sky, it was a moonlit night, and this darkness kind of moved slowly towards them, finally revealing itself to be a, quote, perfect cylinder shape that stretched all the way across the sky to my left and to my right. I could clearly see it directly overhead, but I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. So he kept asking his wife, what is it? Of course, she had no answers. This thing, whatever it was, had no markings, no lights, it made no sound, but it was perfectly uniform, so they didn't feel like this was anything natural. He estimates it was no more than 1,000 feet overhead, but is unsure because he could not estimate its size. But as the witness says, that's my story. It is true. And I just wish that I could not only convey what I saw, but also share the feelings that were and are connected to the experience. I can say with 100% certainty that what I saw was not a naturally occurring phenomena or even remotely similar to anything that I've ever seen before. Abilene has so many cases. Here's a sighting which occurred in September of 1991. A father and his 3 sons were driving in the suburbs when they saw a light swaying back and forth between 2 houses right at rooftop height. Looking up at it, they saw that it was a, quote, huge triangular-shaped object. And as the father says, this round light started to come towards my car. Everything around us seemed gray and quiet, and no sound. It felt like time was standing still. I've always heard of missing time, and I glanced at the time on the car. I went out at that time, and when I came to, I looked at the clock, and I was missing 1 hour. So at that point, he turned to his kids, who were quite young, and asked them if he had fallen asleep, and they said no, nor had they even seen the light or didn't remember it. The witness reported his account to Newfork, writing, quote, I'm glad I can finally say something. 3 years later, early one evening in July of 1994, a man, his wife, and their 2-month-old son were driving home when they noticed a, quote, huge object in the sky about the size of a Walmart. They said it was about 45 to 50 feet off to the side of the road, so he immediately jumped out to take a closer look. As he says, it was shaped like a big triangle with the tips flattened. It was 250 to 300 feet across, and from front to back it was 100 feet, and was about 2 to 3 stories tall. As it started to move off, he hopped in his truck and followed it for about 3 miles to the end of the road. He saw 2 jets on either side of it. It then moved off in the direction of Dyess Air Force Base. Arriving home, he was surprised to see that it was 7:15 a.m. because he had left his office at 5 p.m. and the drive normally takes only 45 minutes. They should have gotten home no later than 6 p.m. So he believes he's missing at least 1 hour of time. He did call Dyess Air Force Base, who denied any knowledge of this incident and said that they had nothing in the area. But since then, the witness has trouble sleeping. He's had a series of dreams about this encounter. He does report seeing UFOs as a young child and wonders if he might have implants in his body as he found, quote, things under my skin that I don't know where they came from or what they are. Very strange. Here's another very unusual case of an anomalous light which occurred one evening in July of 1995. A man, his wife, and a friend were sitting on their front porch talking. The main witness decided to take a walk to stretch his legs, and going some distance away, he lay down on the grass to view the stars and was amazed to see a small star-like object moving, quote, in a very bizarre pattern. He said it started and stopped a few times, at which point, as the witness says, the reality of what I was seeing, that I was definitely seeing a genuine UFO, so overwhelmed me that I actually wondered if I was losing my mind. So he returned to his wife and friend and surreptitiously pointed this out to his wife, being careful not to alert his friend, as he wanted to get their opinions separately. His wife stared up and was amazed, and confirmed that she also saw this star-like object, quote, zipping around, changing directions. He then alerted his friend Pete, who independently confirmed the same thing. And as the main witness says, we all feel absolutely sure that this object was a long ways outside of any atmosphere surrounding this planet. So many cases. Here's another. This occurred during the day on December 23, 2004. A couple and their son were heading north along Treadaway Boulevard, about to turn on South 7th Street, when the husband noticed a strange object in the sky. As he says, it was oval in shape and just sat there in one spot. It was so shiny that you really couldn't look directly at it because of the sun glinting off of it. From what I could see, there were at least 3 lights situated around the top and a black thin line through the middle, as if there were a line of windows. So he pointed it out to his wife, but at that exact moment, the object disappeared. She didn't see it. And as the husband says, my wife keeps laughing at me, saying I have lost it. Hopefully, there are more people in this area that saw this. It makes me feel so alone. Here's another case involving humanoids. June 2nd, 2012. A woman awoke in her bedroom when she noticed a shadowy figure standing right outside her bedroom window. And judging from the height of her window, this figure could be no more than 4 feet tall. She said it had an abnormally large head, a little skinny neck, and it was moving very slowly. Now, looking to the other window, she could see a taller, also very skinny, silhouetted figure. Both of these shadowy figures moved off, and she immediately woke up her husband and told him that somebody was outside. So he turned on the lights, grabbed his gun, and went outside, but of course, nothing was there. One final case from Abilene. June 24, 2021. A man was departing from Abilene, heading north along West Lake Road when he saw, quote, a large white object in the sky. He said it remained stationary at first, and as the witness says, I could see it was a polished white and reflected the sunlight. It looked to be sort of egg or teardrop shaped, with no windows, fins, or any visible propulsion system. As I drew up along beside it, it stopped hovering and matched my speed. So he watched it for some time as it followed him, paced his car, and actually maneuvered between 2 radio towers below their level, after which it turned left and flew off into the distance. Thank you, Fox Stewart. So many interesting cases in Abilene, Texas. I did visit there once. I had a plane that was grounded in Abilene, but did not get to get out and visit. But maybe one day. I do have relatives in Texas, so you never know. Super interesting. Thanks so much. Now let's move to our next location, which is Aloha, Oregon. This was suggested by Eel Grass Meadows. Thank you so much. This was such a fun city to explore. It's perhaps most famous for a 26-foot tall rabbit that has been seen in this area. Not kidding, it's been photographed. 26-foot tall white rabbit named Harvey. I'll provide a photograph so you will believe me that this is actually true. Aloha has a population of about 50,000 people and a really interesting UFO history. I found about 7 cases. Of course, there's a lot more there that I didn't include involving unexplained lights and such. So I'm really focusing on the most interesting cases in each of these locations. But this one does involve some really amazing sightings, some missing time cases, humanoids of course. Thank you, Eelgrass Meadows. I hope you find this as interesting as I did. Sightings in Aloha go all the way back to June 1947 when a massive UFO wave struck the entire planet, really starting the modern age of UFOs. And it was one day in June of 1947 that Mrs. August Krauss was driving when she saw a saucer-shaped object, rounded on the top, she said, and flat on the bottom. She saw that it was executing a series of loops in the sky. It would hover at the top of each loop and then loop again. One very weird thing about it is that the saucer appeared to have a flexible appendage, kind of like the tail of a kite, she said, with, quote, small cross pieces at regular intervals. This was all along the length of this appendage. And when the craft hovered at the top of each loop, this tail, quote, did not droop, but remained fixed in position. So she was puzzled by its appearance, and she stopped the car, rolled down the window, and watched it for at least 5 minutes. During this time, the saucer came closer and closer, and suddenly it darted off in a straight line at high speed and was gone. Very odd encounter. Here's another one, which is so interesting. June of 1973. 4 boys, Nate Schmidt, Barry Greiners, Kenny Ruff, all age 13, and their friend Mike Scott, age 10, were camping out in one of their backyards on Southwest 175th Avenue and Washington Court when they saw strange objects moving around in the sky. And as they watched, more objects appeared, and then more. So amazed, Barry Greiners offered to go into the house to turn on the radio and see if anyone else was reporting the strange objects. So he's inside when suddenly he hears a terrific crash coming from the backyard. As he says, I heard that crash and I thought my friends were goners and that they'd come to get us. Actually, the crashing sound was Nate Schmidt, who had become so excited by the appearance of more objects, 18 in total, that he jumped up and ran so fast to get inside that he ran right through the plate glass patio door. Thankfully, miraculously, he was uninjured. They, of course, told Barry's mother, Nancy, that they were seeing UFOs, and as Nancy says, they had eyes that big when they ran to tell me. So checking to make sure that Nate was uninjured, she went outside, and she saw these objects too. She watched them sometimes cross paths with one another, and it persisted for up to 2 minutes. As Barry says, we'd scored 13 of them, and then Nate saw one split and then come back together and ran in to tell my mom and went right through the door. So they were so excited that they camped out the next night with a telescope this time, and they saw an additional 17 objects. As Nate says, we sleep outside a lot and know what we saw weren't just meteors or shooting stars, although there's a lot of those this time of year. When asked by reporters if they'd be scared if a UFO landed next to them, the 3 13-year-olds said yes, but 10-year-old Mike replied, if I wasn't too scared, I'd try to make friends with the people. Barry laughed and said, ha, if they land, we'll just watch Mike run. But yeah, this 2 days long sighting did not really frighten the boys. As Barry's mother Nancy said, mind you, these are young men, and they certainly weren't afraid. Though she did admit, quote, I just slept out with them to corroborate what they saw. Now, astronomer Jim Davis of the Oregon Museum of Industry and Science was asked about this sighting, and he admitted that he was skeptical of UFOs and said that 97% of sightings can be explained, and that, quote, the chances they saw some of the unexplainable 3% are slim, but it's possible. Now, he insinuated that they were seeing shooting stars, but no comment on the fact that shooting stars generally don't last for 2 minutes, cross each other, split, and come back, or have 18 of them in the sky at one time. An interesting case. And here's another. 10:55 p.m., April 15, 1992. A 20-year-old man from Aloha was in his front yard when he saw a bright blue object approaching him. As it got close, he saw that it was a solid, hemispherical object, flat on the bottom with a dome on top. It was moving so fast it had blurred edges. After about 4 to 5 seconds, the object stopped for no more than 2 seconds. It immediately turned from bright blue to bright red as it accelerated rapidly towards the west and disappeared into the clouds. He saw it, he estimates, for about 40 seconds. Now, students of science will recognize the Doppler shift of light here, which states that when an object emits light and is moving towards you, the light shifts to shorter wavelengths of blue, and when it moves away, the light shifts to the longer wavelengths of red, which is exactly what the witness reported. So a very interesting case. Here's another one. Late June, early July, 1994, an Aloha farmer was shocked to see a crop circle in his wheat field. The farmer was very upset about the loss of his crops, and even more upset when crowds of local residents showed up to take a look at this alleged crop circle. Now, the farmer is convinced it was caused by pranksters who probably vandalized his field. However, researcher Eilis of the Center for Crop Circle Studies says it was not a hoax. As she says, it was not, could not have been made by teenagers, as some would like to believe. Now, the poor farmer reports a loss of more than 20 acres of wheat as a result of the incident. This actually cost him between $7,000 to $10,000 because people were flocking through his fields, destroying his crop. His insurance company refused to cover the loss. Next case occurred in the spring of 1995. This one is quite bizarre. A man known only by his first name, James, was driving near his home in Aloha when he said he saw UFOs following him. After the UFOs left, he went back home. That night, as he's going to bed, he heard a voice in his head telling him to go to a certain street just south of 185th and Southwest Farmington Road. So he did. He went there with his girlfriend. She stayed in the truck while he went over to some trees where he thought he saw somebody standing there. And when he got there, he was amazed to see what he describes as a bug-like being about 5 feet tall. He said it had orangish eyes and what looked to him like a fluorescent orange mane that looked like hair but wasn't hair. He then noticed 2 other shorter beings, identical looking but with no manes. And further away, he saw some short, hairy humanoids, which reminded him kind of Ewoks. The creatures, he said, communicated with him telepathically, presenting images in his mind. Now, James had carried his Bible with him and asked the creature if this was true or not, the Bible. And the being replied, "Yes, there is a God." There are no other details to this story other than that James says he was involved in other strange incidents, if that one wasn't strange enough. This next case comes from a man who, as a child in 1996, recalled seeing a massive metallic disc. This one's so interesting. He was 9 or 10 years old, and he was out in his backyard in Aloha, lying on a grassy hill and just watching the stars. It was just before 11 p.m. when, as the witness says, I suddenly became aware of a large, disc-shaped object hovering above me, above our house, possibly over the street. The object appeared large, dark and metallic, with a series of large round lights around its base, accompanied by smaller lights. It matched the classic description of a flying saucer. I remember watching the object as it moved slowly eastward. Now, the weird part of all this is, the witness did not remember seeing this object arrive. He did not remember it moving away. But as the years passed, he would vacillate between wondering if this all could be a dream, but knowing in his heart that it was real. As he says, even in my regular moments of doubt, there was something in me that kept loudly saying, I know it was real. Now, years later, in 2013, he was talking with a next-door neighbor when spontaneously, without any prompting, the neighbor told him that his wife had witnessed a large, saucer-shaped object hovering over the witness's property, in fact, right over the hill where he had been. She recalled seeing a beam of light come down from it. In fact, it frightened her so badly, she ran upstairs and told her husband, and when they looked out the window, this object was gone. But as the witness says, this conversation strongly reinforced my belief that what I experienced was real, as it confirmed someone else witnessed the same or a similar object at the same location around the same time. I remember him saying there was a lot of sightings and activity in our area that summer. So the witness now wonders if maybe he had missing time or was possibly taken on board, because he says that at its closest point, the craft seemed to be no more than 40 to 60 feet away from him. Here's another amazing case. September 26, 2007, 11 p.m. A man reports that he was walking from his house to the local shopping center when he saw what he first thought was a bright star or an airplane, but soon realized it was much stranger because it came down right over his head. Now he was nearsighted and didn't have his glasses on and couldn't see it clearly, but he was convinced that it, quote, had to be something from out of this world. So reaching the grocery store, this object was still there. He went inside and asked some of the employees to come outside and look, and they confirmed that they saw it too and could not explain it. For the witness, quote, the object was dark and diamond-shaped. It was taller than it was wide, like two 45-degree triangles. There were red glowing marks going down the sides, and they would pulsate about every other second. On either side was a small white light that would blink in between every other red pulse. When the red lights pulsed, I could sort of hear it and feel it, like I was somehow connected to it. I swear to God, this thing was hovering directly over me as it passed by, maybe 200 to 500 feet up, like the height of a low flying airplane. And no, it was not an airplane, or anything that I have ever seen. This was the most amazing thing I have ever seen. One final case in Aloha, January 4th, 2020. Two brothers were driving down Farmington Road towards Beaverton when they noticed a, quote, a bright pink-white light descend from the clouds. They at first thought it might be a star, except it was a cloudy night. Then this object became much brighter and seemed to pace them along the road. Both, they said, became strangely mesmerized, confused, and a little scared. They wanted to pull over, but for some reason kept driving. This object moved a half-mile ahead of them, hovered, and then descended into the trees. During this whole time, there was another car in front of them. So as they stopped at the intersection of 185th and Farmington with the other car, they rolled down the window and talked to the driver, who said that he saw the strange light too. That's all we know about that case, but interestingly, this is the same location as the 1995 encounter above. Thank you, Eelgrass Meadows. Such an interesting place. Aloha, Oregon. So many really compelling cases. How weird is it that two of them occurred at the same exact intersection? Amazing. For me, one of the most poignant cases was of the little boy who was lying on a grassy hill looking at the stars and sees this UFO right over his head and apparently has missing time. Comes back years later and is talking to his neighbor who, out of the blue, starts talking about how they saw a UFO hovering over the witness's house. What a synchronicity that was. So many amazing cases. So yeah, thanks again, Eelgrass Meadows. That was so interesting. Now let's move to our last and final location in this episode. The last place we're going to explore today is Reykjavik, Iceland. This comes from a suggestion by Kitty Finnur Iglor. I hope I pronounced that right. Some of the locations in this episode were definitely difficult for me to pronounce. But wow, so interesting. Reykjavik is really a fascinating place. It's the world's northernmost capital. It was founded way back in 874 AD. So this is a very old location, and in fact has the world's oldest parliament. So interesting. Reportedly, it has no McDonald's, no Starbucks either. So I kind of like that. The city is heated by geothermal water. That's also very cool. Another interesting fact, from 1924 to 1984, dogs were banned in Reykjavik. Of course, that ban was lifted, but at that time, no dogs were allowed, and the city became very well known for its large population of cats. Very interesting. Basically, 2/3 of the people who live in Iceland live in Reykjavik. Another interesting fact about Reykjavik is more than half of the world's puffins, these little birds, nest there. So yeah, an amazing place. It's got some very interesting UFO cases, humanoids, missing time, some crazy sightings, and also a really interesting cryptozoological sighting, which I just had to include. So thank you, Kitty Finor Iglor. I hope you find this interesting. The first Reykjavik encounter that I could find of any real interest occurred on December 18, 1976, when Ingmar Sveinbjörnsson was at the controls of a Glofax airline flying from Akureyri to Reykjavik when they got a clear radar image of a UFO moving at 18,000 feet. Says the captain, "I had the radar set to 100 miles, and suddenly I saw a plane," meaning the UFO, "coming very clearly into the radar at tremendous speed." Flight controller Haldor Sigurdsson and flight attendant Kirsten Bernhoft were also watching this, and we observed that the speed of the object was about 3,600 miles per hour, or 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers per hour. This object was heading north and had a course almost directly towards us. And the closest it has been was 2 miles from us. Our radar is one of the most advanced in aircraft today. The radar is designed to flash when an object comes within 11 degrees of the plane's heading, and during this time the light flashes continuously. About a minute later, this object was on our radar, but a few minutes later, I was able to see it from Reykjavik to Akureyri, and it was 6 times smaller on the radar than the previous radar we had seen. It was truly strange to watch this. So they checked the radar, which of course appeared to be functioning normally. Now here is a very interesting report involving truly bizarre creatures. Perhaps not extraterrestrial, but better defined as cryptozoological creatures. It was one day in November 1984 that bird hunters Julius Asgeirsson and Olafur Olafsson were at Lake Kleifarvatn, about 20 miles south of Reykjavik, when they saw something they will never forget. About 200 to 300 yards away from them, strange creatures were emerging from the lake. As Julius says, they were larger than horses. They moved about like dogs, but swam like seals. At first we thought they were rocks, but as they started to move, we had the surprise of our lives. We have never seen anything like this before. And at first we were reluctant to tell anyone. We feared people would think we were crazy. Now, after the creatures returned to the icy waters, they checked the area and did find strange footprints on the ground. As Julius says, the footprints were larger than those of horse hooves and split like those of a cloven-footed animal, but with 3 cloves instead of 2. As it turns out, Iceland does have a long history of strange creatures such as kelpies, or water horses. These, quote, mythical creatures reportedly resemble horses to some degree and would trick innocent humans into taking a ride and leading them to the bottom of lakes. Now, Icelandic biologist Heil Hallgrimsson did not discount the hunters' stories and said, and I quote, "So many trustworthy people tell of strange natural occurrences on Iceland which we cannot identify, but I am certain that there is more in nature than we know." Now historically, this lake does have other reports of monster-like creatures, with a very early report from 1750 describing what witnesses said was a giant black worm, kind of like a humongous earthworm, sunning itself on the shore of the lake. How creepy is that? Now here's an amazing case, what appears to be a missing time onboard encounter, which occurred to a young 17-year-old couple in the early morning hours of August 10, 1995. It was 1:30 a.m. They had reached the intersection of Miklubraut and Heilastabraut, heading east, and decided to go home. It was raining, the light was red, and they were waiting for it to change, when suddenly a very bright light shone down on their car from above. At the same exact time, they heard a loud thud sound. Frightened, the girl, who was driving, immediately accelerated through the intersection and drove off. Weirdly, they noticed it was now suddenly no longer raining, and looking at the time, was now 2 a.m. To them, it had seemed only like 30 seconds. But no, a half an hour had passed. And following this incident, the girl reported that she had a few strange red spots on her arms. And 3 months later, apparently in confirmation, another witness emerged who said that they had seen strange lights in that exact area on the same night at the same time. The next Reykjavik case I could find occurred around 1 a.m. on October 18, 1996. And in fact, the witness submitted a report to MUFON and described it very lucidly, so I'll just quote him directly. As he says, "My friend and I were on a trip to Iceland. It was a cold, clear night over Reykjavik. The sky was inky black with perfect visibility. We were ascending down from the cathedral at High Point. No one was about when something directly above appeared in the blackness. Not one, but two bright white perfectly oval shapes moved side by side over the city. Then one stopped still. The other stopped, then rotated around the first. I was transfixed. As I watched, they then began to circle slowly around each other. For several minutes they did this. I could tell that they were very high, seemingly at plane altitude. One would spin, the other would emulate it. Then they hung still before one turned at an angle, ascended even higher, and tore off at immense speed out over the North Atlantic. The second one turned, ascended, and shot off in the same direction. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. It's an experience that's perplexed me ever since, and I wonder if anyone else witnessed it." This next case is very sparse on details, but certainly sounds like a genuine account. At 3:30 p.m. on September 12, 2007, the witness describes a, quote, gray disc-shaped object, which he said moved across the city from the east, then turned north over the city center. It moved slowly at an estimated altitude of some 3,000 feet, and he said it was surrounded by a halo of light at least 8 times the size of the object itself. And he is convinced, of course, that it was not a plane or a weather balloon. This case comes from a student of the University of Iceland. It was around 2:45 a.m. on April 17, 2010. The student stepped out on the deck of his residence in Reykjavik to smoke a cigarette when he noticed a light descend from the sky. He first thought it was a shooting star, but realized it was moving far too slowly. And as the witness says, "As I was looking at it for maybe 5 seconds, it suddenly ascended in a curve, and then suddenly it makes a U-turn in the sky and bolts at high velocity in the opposite direction. Then the object vanishes, but reappears a short distance away from its vanishing position about 2 seconds later, takes off at high speed again, and then vanishes again. So he immediately called out his girlfriend to see, but by then the object was gone." However, events had just begun, because a half hour later he stepped out again and saw another star-like light. This one was moving in a straight line, but it was changing speeds. And over the next 20 minutes, he says he saw 5 more of these weird star-like lights. He called out his girlfriend, and she was able to view a few of them. He finally went back inside, but just before retiring for the night at around 4:40 a.m., he went outside again and says he saw 5 or 6 more of these weird lights. And as he says, they seemed to appear out of nowhere, and then they would bolt away at high speed and vanish. One of the lights actually took a whirl in the air before bolting away. He does not believe these objects could be satellites, as satellites do not turn, accelerate, or decelerate. They couldn't have been planes as they were too high, and furthermore, there was very little or no air traffic at this time, as the volcano, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Eyjafjallajökull, was erupting, which had caused 20 countries across northern Europe to close their airspace. And as the witness says, maybe that UFO was observing the volcano and used the chance, as there were no other aircraft around. But that's just speculation. I'd like to note that I've never seen anything like this before. I do believe it is possible that aliens may have visited us, and that UFOs might be alien spacecraft. The things I witnessed yesterday night left a lasting impression on me, and I'm actually filing this report because I just need to get this sighting off my chest. A brief account involving the most common type of sighting, anomalous lights, occurred around 1:40 a.m. on August 19, 2014. Two security guards were standing outside their place of employment. Both security guards looked up at the same time and saw a star-like object moving upwards in the sky. Moments later, two others began moving around while the first one split in two and paralleled one of the other objects. One then took a left turn and two other star-like lights appeared. Says the witnesses, all the items moved erratically until they disappeared altogether. Now here's a very interesting case involving a UFO with humanoids. It was 11:10 p.m. on October 26, 2018, as the witness was walking up a pathway near a church on his way home after visiting a friend. This was a walk he did regularly, and he always enjoyed looking at the church. But on this occasion, he saw a glowing circular object hovering directly above the church. He said it was silver gray in color, it had 4 illuminated sections around the perimeter. Part of the craft was, quote, the lightest green color I have ever seen. And he said another part was light blue like the sea. And as the witness says, I knew that I was seeing something not of this world. So he estimates that this craft was about 150 feet wide, hovering maybe 250 feet above the church tower, which itself was about 50 to 75 feet tall. He estimates he was about 300 feet away from this object, but most amazing was that part of this craft was transparent, and inside he could see, quote, 5 human-like beings. He estimated that they were about 4 to 5 feet tall, and they did not appear to be normal humans, because as he says, quote, they were skinny, like people who had been starved to the brink of death. They had no distinct outlines and appeared to move without moving their legs. I could not make out a face on those beings as I was too far away. They looked like a human head, except they appeared to have no ears. The beings stayed in that chamber or room for about 3 minutes, and they would move around like there was a glass floor under them. So the witness was so stunned to the point that he could not move, even though he wanted to. But as he says, it was a very calm experience, and at no time did I feel threatened or scared. I was mostly stunned. At one point, the beings disappeared from view, and about 20 seconds later, the craft rose vertically about 1,000 feet, stopped, and darted off at an angle, moving so fast it left a, quote, trail of rainbow-colored light behind it. The witness shared his experience with several people, some of who believed him and some who just laughed. As the witness says, that was quite the spectacle. I don't know how to feel about this encounter, as it was such a calm experience. So one final case, as you can see, involves an 82-second long video of what appears to be an anomalous light in the sky. Now the witness admits that it is possible that this object was a planet or star, but if it was the only one visible, or certainly that was appearing on his camera, and it remained in the sky, he says, for a very long time, long enough that he was able to get his video camera and capture this videotape you see here of it. He said it also seemed to occasionally change color and had a shiny texture to it. So you can make up your own mind about this footage. It's certainly interesting. Thank you again, Kitty Fanur Iglor. It was really a lot of fun to explore Reykjavik and its UFO history. Absolutely some amazing cases there. It always surprises me that there are still people who are skeptical of UFOs, because here we have cases involving radar, photographic cases. people being taken on board. So many cases. It's just unbelievable to me that anyone can still be skeptical. Honestly, I think skeptics have not done their research, have not done their homework, and I think if anyone would take the time to look at the huge amount of documented cases, they can only come away convinced. So there you go. 7 cases, mostly in the United States, but 1 from outside the United States, all having a history of UFO encounters. This is really significant. I think there's some really important takeaways. I always mention this when I do these episodes, but the fact that there are UFO sightings and encounters in all of these locations shows that these encounters are far more common than most people believe. As any UFO researcher will tell you, the vast majority of people who have an encounter don't even go public. So basically, we're only seeing the very tip of the iceberg here. Another important takeaway is, if it's true, and it certainly seems like it, that UFOs are visiting every location on this planet, what does that say about the ETs? Is this just them studying our planet, or are they putting on a vigorous publicity campaign? I think it's the latter. I think they really want people to know that we are not alone. So there you go. UFOs are ubiquitous. They're being seen pretty much everywhere. If you have a location you'd like me to look up, I'm certainly happy to put it on my very long list. Just please be patient and I will get to it. But until next time, thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate you guys watching. It means a lot to me. I love you all. Till next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun, and I will see you next time.